One of my favorites among our internet listeners is a Jewish refugee from the Ukraine who now lives and teaches in New York. Mikhail often shares his surprisingly insightful views of learning both about America and about Christianity from his students at the university. He recently sent me this clip from a student paper, and for the benefit of our podcast listeners, let me say that this is a paper explaining the severe punishment imposed on Job in the biblical story. And the student says this: God did what he did to him out of love. It is safe to say that this is similar to the way parents treat their kids. Sometimes parents yell or beat their kids, but they might not tell you why. Eventually, when you grow up, you come to learn that they did what they did to teach you right from wrong. Now, this obviously provokes a number of responses, not the least of which is that this student apparently beat him without even showing the dignity of an explanation. The second is that this influenced his view of God and God's love such that the suffering of Job was not just some bizarre anthropomorphic ego betting between God and Satan, but it was in some twisted way for Job's benefit. I still find it hard to explain how killing Job's children and all of his employees was a loving gesture made for Job's welfare, but this student is obviously trying to make exactly that leap. A child psychologist I once heard lecturing described his observations of an abused child through the one-way mirror that's often used when you are observing a child at play, and he saw this child beating a doll to pieces and shouting, "I love you, I love you, I love you," with each blow. We know that almost all child abusers were abused when they were children. That's not an excuse, but there is a relationship between being a victim of abuse and justifying abusing others. But here's the real paradox. Calling abuse love seems to somehow make it virtuous or spiritual or noble. Let me just go on record as saying, if you ever feel like hitting your child is in the child's best interest, you should take parenting classes immediately. Beating your kids is a sign that you are failing as a parent, not that your child is failing as a child. Now, just as victims of child abuse have a tendency to become abusers, isn't it obvious that victims of religious abuse are also the most likely to become religiously abusive? It's 2018, folks. The telescope has been around for 400 years. We've been engaged in space travel for over 50 years. Still, literally billions of children will be reared in this century with the belief that God is enthroned above them in the clouds, watching their every move, always watching. And you know what else? Even your thoughts are not private from the prying eyes and ears of God, who knows every foul word, every vile and evil thought you ever have, and will surely punish you if you don't stop it. And we wrap up this whole judgment scene in pretty Christmas wrapping paper and hand it to you, telling you that the threat of eternal torment comes to you out of love. And the God who's watching you and loves you so much and is willing to burn you in hell forever would like to talk to you about your internet browser history and some of the movies that you have downloaded from Netflix. We tell these lies to children when they are too young to fight back, when even if the contradictions are so strong in the mind of a 5-year-old screaming out of their little skulls, they still take it in. They internalize this belief in a loving God who is, by all accounts, a stalker a peeping Tom, a divine voyeur, if you will, who is willing to do absolutely unspeakably violent things to you for being human. Now, most of us know better than to take our children to see a violent movie, but then we take them to Sunday school, where they are exposed to a story about a father who was prepared to cut his son's heart out of his chest based on what the voices in his head were telling him. We fill children's early lives with images of demons and devils and of fiery torment. Our little Midwestern city doesn't make it into national news very often, but when we do, it is often a story like this one taken from USA Today about the arrest of one of our very loud and annoying street preachers. This one is Aaron Brummett, but he's not the only one who draws attention to himself by trying to stop downtown revelers from enjoying themselves. Sometimes the college kids will stop and argue with him. Some people roll down their windows and yell at him. They heap abuses on him and make fun of him. But what they don't realize is that that abuse is what he really wants. That in his mind, abuse is a reward. It's like throwing a Scooby snack to Scooby-Doo. He's never going to say no. And the more you abuse him, the longer he's going to preach and the more often he's going to come out and stand on his stool. Because he was brought up under the threat of an abusive God who also loved him very much. And like that child pounding a doll's head on the table while yelling, "I love you, I love you, I love you," he believes that abuse is affection. It is a reward. I saw him standing on a stool and preaching on the corner of Walnut Street and South Avenue just Friday night. And I imagined trying to engage him in conversation. If I were to tell him that love is my religion, I suspect that he would not initially disagree, until he would come to understand that I actually mean loving is how I practice my religion. The use of the word love is an important adjective in religions whose real practice involves deception, manipulation, threats, fear, and abuse. The belief system uses adjectives that allow it to mask its abuse as being something else, as being piety or faithfulness, religious fervor, virtue. In short, a sincere Christian life is the life of someone who is abused and is an abuser. When, in any meaningful sense, a religion is not defined by adjectives as much as it is defined by verbs. If your religion is predicated on a God who is love, then shouldn't your devotion, your worship, your discipleship, wouldn't that be acts of love? Being loving? Many Unitarian churches have taken up the use of the phrase beyond belief to describe what they're trying to do. And you've heard me for years talking about the difference between orthodoxy, right beliefs, and orthopraxy, right behaviors. Belief systems that are all about orthodoxy isn't what we really want out of religious people, is it? What someone believes, whether they're a bishop or a cardinal or a pope, their personal beliefs is not what we really want out of a spiritual person, right? What we want is kindness and acceptance and love and being good people. Now, over the past 20 years, I've spent a lot of time in Nicaragua, and our teams of house builders and physicians or teachers, and this guy's name is Harvin, and I'm photographed with him only because it was remarkable that he could stand up. We raised money for multiple surgeries. This kid has a deforming disease that's made it impossible for him to walk or hold a pencil, and during that visit a few years ago, he was standing up and going to school, and it was just a happy day for both of us to be able to be together. But we've often shared hotel space on these trips to Nicaragua with other church groups who come armed with Bibles, salvation tracts, and usually a lot of candy. And I've sat in the lobby of the hotel listening to these eager young missionaries talk about going to the dump outside of Managua. If you'll advance to the next slide. Yeah. And the kids there root through the garbage looking for something to eat. And these North American missionaries come down and offer them candy in exchange for the opportunity to tell them about Jesus, which always makes me crazy because the faith of these North Americans wouldn't survive a week trying to live in Nicaragua, and the Nicaraguans have a faith that they would never understand. But these kids want to go down and tell these children in the garbage heap about hell. They're living in hell, but these college students want to go down and tell them about what hell is like in the Holy Spirit, and they'll usually throw in singing some Spanish hymns, and if they're really lucky, they'll also give them a demonstration of speaking in tongues. Now, we can sit here and wag our heads in disbelief that anyone could be so hypocritical, so crass, so fundamentally evil. But let me tell you this. When they are engaging us in conversation about what we're doing in Nicaragua, that we're building houses, we're paying for school supplies, that we're providing doctors in rural neighborhoods, or making micro-business loans to start small businesses, they're okay with all that. But they're mortified by the fact that we are not using this opportunity to save their souls. That we're going to give them a house, create a job, provide food and medicine, and still let them go to hell. Because we don't hand out Bibles or tracts, we usually don't sing hymns, and though I actually do have a little bit of German, a little bit of Spanish vocabulary, I just can't speak in tongues at all. I've never figured that one out. What is obvious to us is that love must be accompanied by action. What is obvious to them is that meaningful religion must protect innocent children from the risk of going to hell. And that is an ideological gap that is very, very difficult to bridge. But it's crucial that we figure out how to do it. People ask me, and I see that I'm scheduled to deliver a lecture in England in a couple of weeks about the future of the church. And boy, I sure wish I knew. Because you look in a crystal ball and you say, if the church can't make the transition away from belief into action, then I'm pretty sure the church doesn't have a future. We'll either make the transition from belief to action, or I don't think the church has got a future. And then if we do make that transition, I'm not entirely sure that bricks and mortar churches and steeples and pipe organs and all that will survive. Now, I can't remember this little guy's name, but let's call him So What. I visited his school in a rural village in the mountains above Matagalpa, and I stole this line from my friend Keith Jaspers, who's the founder of the Rainbow Network. I said to his little class of about 20 students meeting in a dirt floor classroom, I said to them, I have heard los estudiantes aquí en esta comarca, the students in this little village, son los más inteligentes en todo el mundo, are the most intelligent children in all the world. And then I would say, ¿Es verdad que dice? Is it true what they say? And they didn't want to lie, and they seemed, they didn't want to brag, but I keep saying, ¿Es verdad? ¿Es verdad? And finally they say, sí, sí es verdad, Norte America Blanco. And eventually, tall white man. And eventually they found the courage to say, yes, yes, it's true. Most intelligent children in the world. And maybe it is true, we don't know, but it was true at least for that moment, wasn't it? But I come back home and our little progressive church is so small, and down the highway there's a church that will send teams of missionaries to Matagalpa armed with candy and Bibles, and that church has 6 or 7 or 8,000 people attending their 3 campuses. But then I think about, so what? What does having 3 campuses mean? What does it mean to have thousands of members, literally 8 drum kits on stage in front of a choir of 400? But you add all that together and you kneel down beside So What, watching him learn to make his letters in his notebook, and you wonder, what do all these mega churches mean if it's all about belief and getting their own sorry asses into heaven? If your religion can't protect him from malaria-infested mosquitoes, if your religion can't get his bed up off the ground where the scorpions are, if your religion can't drill a well in his village so that they can get water out of something other than a pond where the cows and the pigs poop and where the cows and chickens walk all the time, then your religion is nothing but a joke. It's an insult to God and a disappointment to you.
Preach it.
Your holy writ, your doctrine of the Trinity, your creeds, it doesn't matter what liturgy you were baptized in if he can't get a drink of clean water. What is your communion ritual if that kid's got no bread in his house? Keep your Bibles, keep your candy, and go change the world so that So What and all the kids like him can finally go to school, sleep safely at night, wake up to a decent breakfast in the morning. Because religious beliefs mean nothing at all if you cannot move beyond belief to practice. And look, folks, I'm not saying that communities of faith need to take over all the social services, either in our city or in the world. No matter how grand our goals, we cannot raise enough donated dollars or convince enough people to join teams to go out and build all the houses that are needed or solve all of the world's problems. What we are doing, what we mean when we talk about our preference for the poor, is that we are practicing compassion. You will never hear me say anything that is more true than this: that you learn to dance by dancing, you learn to sing by singing, you learn to ride a bike by riding a bike. It doesn't matter what books you've read about dancing, and it doesn't matter what you personally believe about singing. It doesn't matter what your grandmother believed about bicycles. Spirituality is exactly the same thing. You learn to show compassion by showing compassion. You learn to forgive by forgiving. And you learn to love by loving.
Amen.
There's no other way to do it. Now, in many ways, our crosses, our steeples, our labels, our denominations all just get in the way. What makes our religion real is how we practice it. And by practice, we become more compassionate, more loving people. And the next time we go vote, remember So What? Remember this guy. I don't want to know who will win the next elections. I don't know who will win the next elections. But it's got to be about more than party or markets. It's got to mean that when the votes are counted, this kid's going to have a better life. I hope when I ask you, what did your vote mean to So What, that you've got an answer. And if you don't have a good answer, then get one before you vote again. Because until our religion changes the world that he lives in, our religion means nothing at all.
Amen.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.